they themselves are marginalized and are very much involved in the narration of the African, you know, that famous book Roots by, was a very, it made people aware that there is a history there of people of the Western world, that is. Of course, the Africans knew there was a history there. But it has given the world is now paying attention to these histories and to women and so on, I think.
There's a lady at the back who's had her hand right up. Yes, just there, thanks. Yep.
Good morning, my name is Tahira Abdullah, and I was going to ask about the missing women from her story as opposed to just history. That question has already been asked. So I would now like to make a plea for linking the corrections in removing the distortions and biases in our joint history with India, along with changes in the curricula in civics, social studies, and bringing in peace studies, civics, and human rights, and environmental conservation studies into the curriculum, along with removing distortions in her story and history. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take a question from Dan.
Answer that.
Yes, certainly.
The last chapter of my book is about human rights in Pakistan.
Can we take a question down here, please? Yep.
Will WikiLeaks make history more authentic?
What?
Oh, I love this question. Will WikiLeaks make history more authentic?
Question, please.
The question was about WikiLeaks and will it make history more authentic? I actually have to say, if I can make my own comment on this, I'm very distressed by WikiLeaks because what worries me is that now they'll write very boring cables because they think they're going to be leaked. And actually what I make a lot of my kind of meat on is the terrible things that people say when they don't think they'll be overheard. So I'm very worried that it's now going to be self-censorship. Does anyone have anything else to add on WikiLeaks?
Well, actually, WikiLeaks was very much, you know, it's sort of knowledge that was already current. Everyone knew that this is so. WikiLeaks has just sort of corroborated some of the stuff that was already well known. And we had our own WikiLeaks during Aurangzeb. There was a historian called Khafi Khan, and he used to write a whole lot of stuff which was, you know, not really acceptable to the courts and so on. So we've had our own WikiLeaks, but this is okay. I don't think that is that crucial to the writing of history.
Another one, this lady just at the front here.
History, I think, is a very important area
Please
of human development and civilization. I've often come across, and right now also in the discussion, that should history be taken from the nation state ever since, or history should be beyond and before that as well to address the biases issue. When we start history from a context of a nation states, then I think a lot of history is already lost. What I mean to say is that how we focus people to look at history not only from nation state point of view, but it's beyond that. If we talk about history.
Well, I think historians are looking well beyond that, actually, I'd say. But would anyone, Jean-Luc Racine?
Yeah, well, I can pick up this one, of course. And you're absolutely right, of course. And it's something which does exist, obviously. But I don't know exactly at what time of national history it's possible to go beyond national histories. But it's quite clear that now histories have gone much beyond this stage of building the national narratives. We have historians which are, I mean, the big change, in a way, has been, as far as Europe is concerned at least, taken perhaps 30, 40 years ago, when a new brand of historians decided that the traditional history focus on the kings, the emperors, the state was to be there, but it was time to look at the people as well. And looking at the people was, it's something which is of course very difficult, because quite often the records are the records which have been prepared or written as far as the state power is concerned. If we look at the subcontinent, it's clearly what the subaltern historian, basically in India or from India now in many American universities, have started to work on, trying to go beyond official records for finding out what was the life of the people as far as possible. But we may go, I mean, there is no end to the way of rethinking the way of conducting historical studies. You have people who are working on, for instance, the history of the family. Going up to the point to say, well, the family as we know it, in its various forms, it could be the nuclear family, it could be the joint family, but it's basically whatever we may believe intimately. It's an historical construct, because if we go back to 5, 6, 7 centuries back, the relationship between the wife and the husband, or the relationship even between the mother and the child was different. So it's not to pick up from a very important point that Pervez Oudboy mentioned. We don't have necessarily to be afraid about the destruction of a kind of common history. I mean, the various way to conduct historical studies must, of course, not end by building very separate histories. So the real challenge is, how do you contribute to build up a sense of community without drifting to a kind of hyper-nationalist history? And that it's a challenge everywhere.
Professor Kazmi, do you have anything to... Oh, sure, Pervez.
Quickly comment on
Yes,
this.
yes.
I think it's a very important question, but Dr. Hamida Khurro has already alluded to it, that history is the narrative of the victorious, as written by the victorious, not by the vanquished. There's a marvelous book. It's called A People's History of the United States, written by Howard Zinn. And this, for the first time in the United States, has tried to change the way in which the history of the United States has been recorded. Not from the point of view of the founding fathers, of those who came from Spain and Europe, but from the point of view of those indigenous peoples who were eventually eliminated and conquered.
Well, there's another thing I would like to add. You asked whether we should begin with national history. Now, let me tell you that as far as Hajjaj ibn Yusuf is concerned, in Middle Eastern history, he's a villain. In South Asian history, he is a hero. Now, how can you logically begin the history of Pakistan with 711? You can't. Because let me tell you one thing more. Because the first Arab settlers, who were also the first Muslim settlers, they were not only welcomed, but given high offices by their Hindu hosts. There's nothing in the religion of the Hindus. You see, Hinduism as interpreted by Gandhi, or Hinduism as interpreted by Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, and the Islam practiced there in South Asia as a whole, that was not actually a thing that was mutually exclusive or inimical. A lot has happened. We are writing subaltern history, but let me just mention two factors. Jinnah's personal friendship with Motilal Nehru and Jawaharlal Nehru's standoffish attitude to Jinnah was what made things that were bad enough much worse. Much worse. The partition of India is controversial because the partition of India was avoidable.
A point that I'd love to pick up on, actually. It's a fascinating discussion, but we've only got time for one or two more questions. The lady down here was...
Bela Raza Jamil. Fascinating, absolutely. Puts up 3 or 4 critical issues. One is, what is the demand side story of history? I mean, we are talking from supply side, but from a demand side point of view, taking into account Pakistan and a kind of an official death of history in schools has led to general silence, and there isn't a demand that is emerging in spite of the fact that there is an entire shift in the so-called paradigm of education, saying that now we need to go into constructivist methodologies of education and learning. But there is a kind of a disconnect between saying that and actually acting upon that, because if that was so, would we not have what Aisha Jalal says, the method of history, which would be used cross-cuttingly across every subject? So that's one...
one question will do,
That's
thanks.
it.
If I could put that to Hamida Kuzmi.